Why did no one look at her when she stepped off the transport? And why did that feel deliberate? The ramp dropped with a hydraulic groan, exhaling a wave of heat that smelled like diesel, dust, and burned metal. Fire-base obsidian sat carved into the desert like a wound that refused to close. Concrete barriers, Hesco walls, antennas trembling in the wind. It didn't greet newcomers, it measured them. Captain Ara Vance stepped down with a single duffel slung over her shoulder. No escort. No questions. No acknowledgement. Soldiers leaned against crates and armored trucks, uniforms darkened by sweat and grit. They glanced once quick, practiced, dismissive, clean boots, pressed sleeves. A logistics captain, rear echelon, someone sent from air-conditioned rooms to count bullets while others bled. She heard the whispers anyway. Desk jockey. Lost her way to the PX. Another paper pusher. Ara didn't react. She never did. Her eyes moved instead, quiet, precise, cataloging the base the way others read faces. A loose bolt on a watchtower railing. A generator cable worn thin enough to spark. The wind direction, southwest. Consistent. Sound would carry far tonight. She filed it all away without effort. Inside the female barracks, the air was stale and sharp with disinfectant. Two other women nodded at her without curiosity and returned to their screens. No introductions, no small talk. Ara preferred it that way. She unpacked in silence. No photos, no letters, no reminders of a life outside the wire. Just folded uniforms, a standard toiletry kit, a data pad, and her weapon. The M4 came apart and went back together in under 90 seconds. Clean, efficient, muscle memory. Hidden deep in her bag, wrapped in oilcloth, rested a single heavy challenge coin. Its markings were worn smooth, almost erased. She didn't take it out. She never did when others were around. Some ghosts were better left untouched. That night, she lay on her bunk listening. To most people, the bass hummed. Generators, distant voices, boots on gravel. To Ara, it was a pattern, a baseline. She memorized it the way others memorized prayers. Any deviation would matter. She slept lightly. She always did. 3 days later, the mess hall was loud with fatigue and forced humor. Metal trays clattered. Coffee burned. Protein paste steamed without apology. Ara sat alone at a small table, data pad open, coffee untouched. That was when the shadow fell across her screen. Colonel Marcus Thorne didn't approach quietly. He never did anything quietly. Tall, broad, chest heavy with medals. A voice built to dominate space. Junior officers trailed him like debris caught in his gravity. Captain Vance. Not a greeting, a challenge. She looked up slowly. "I've reviewed your file," he said, eyes scanning her as if she were an inventory item. "Logistics, Quartermaster Corps." He gestured around the mess hall with open contempt. "This is the tip of the spear. We fight wars here. We don't count boxes." A few soldiers stilled. Others leaned in without looking. Ara took a sip of coffee before answering. Calm, measured. "I go where I'm assigned, Colonel." Her voice didn't rise. It didn't apologize. It didn't defend. That was what angered him. "Then stay out of the way," he snapped. "Stick to manifests and containers. Let real soldiers handle the war." He turned and left, laughter following him, forced, brittle, performative. Ara went back to her screen as if nothing had happened. But she noticed everything. For the next week, she became invisible. She reorganized supply sheds until chaos turned intuitive. Fewer shortages, faster repairs, smoother rotations. Command noticed the results, not the person responsible. Before dawn each day, she walked the perimeter, not for fitness, for familiarity. Blind spots, overlapping fields of fire that didn't quite overlap, guards who lost focus at 300, a dry riverbed offering cover too close to the western wall. She watched training drills from afar, fast, loud, aggressive, and sloppy, Muzzles crossed teammates, reloads dragged, footwork failed under pressure, Hollywood confidence, real-world gaps. In the comms tent, she listened while pretending to audit equipment. Beneath the noise, beneath the static, she heard a rhythm, a pattern others dismissed, not interference, something intentional, quiet, patient. She didn't report it. Not yet. She watched people too. A young intel analyst with sharp instincts and no confidence. A motor pool sergeant stretched past exhaustion, keeping old vehicles alive. Strengths, weaknesses, stress fractures in a system pretending to be solid. Colonel Thorne saw muscle in motion. Ara saw systems. And systems failed under pressure. The pressure came with the wind. A brown smear on the horizon grew into a wall. The sky sickened. Veterans exchanged looks they didn't explain. When the sandstorm hit, it swallowed everything. Visibility collapsed. Antennas screamed. Dust invaded lungs and electronics alike. Then the radios went silent. Not degraded, gone. Sensors flared red across the command screens. Breaches, everywhere. Alarms howled without meaning. Thorne shouted orders into the void, throwing squads into a storm that didn't care about volume or rank. Men disappeared into dust, chasing alerts that led nowhere. Control shattered. Fear crept in. And through it all, Ara Vance walked into the command center without running. She stopped at the map table. The breaches are a feint. Silence followed her words. She pointed not at the chaos but at the absence, a sealed supply tunnel, forgotten, unwatched. They're coming from below. For a moment, no one breathed. Trusting her meant admitting failure. Not trusting her meant losing everything. Thorne made the call. Minutes later, the tunnel erupted with fire and violence. The ambush died before it was born. The storm passed. The base survived. No one thanked her. But no one ignored her again. And somewhere deep inside Ara Vance, a door she'd kept locked stayed closed, just a little longer. Because this wasn't the test. It was only the warning. She stood alone at the edge of the operations floor, and for the first time, everyone noticed she hadn't left. The storm was gone, but its echo remained. Fine dust still coated consoles and boots. Voices were quieter now, measured, uncertain. Firebase Obsidian had survived the night, but something fundamental had shifted, like a bone that had healed crooked. The illusion of certainty was gone. Captain Ara Vance moved back to the logistics depot without announcement. No applause followed her. No formal recognition. Just looks, longer now, heavier. She felt them on her back as she walked, curiosity mixed with unease, respect that didn't yet know its own name. Inside the depot, the familiar order steadied her, pallets stacked with purpose, labels aligned, systems obeyed logic. She allowed herself a single exhale. Control existed here, predictability, things that made sense. Private Jenkins appeared near her desk, hesitant, clutching a data pad like a shield. "Captain," he said, the word came out differently than before, slower, careful. I wanted to say thank you." She didn't look up right away. "How did you know?" he asked. "The data didn't point there, none of it did." Ara finally met his eyes. He wasn't afraid, just confused, searching. "I listened," she said. "That was all." He nodded, as if that answered something much bigger than the question he'd asked. Word spread anyway. It always did. Stories didn't need permission. By nightfall, soldiers spoke her name with lowered voices. The logistics captain who'd seen through the storm. The quiet one who didn't panic when everyone else did. Colonel Thorne said nothing. But he watched. Ara felt it during briefings she wasn't invited to. In the way his eyes lingered before looking away. In the way orders shifted subtly. Small changes meant to reassert control. He hadn't forgiven her. Worse, he hadn't understood her. And men like Thorn didn't forgive what they couldn't dominate. Days passed, then weeks. A fragile equilibrium settled over the base. Ara remained efficient, distant, unremarkable by design. She did not correct sloppy drills, did not volunteer insight. She had learned long ago that offering truth too freely only painted targets. But the base was being watched now from the outside. High Command noticed the tunnel incident, not officially, not in writing, but scrutiny arrived like pressure in the ears before altitude sickness. Inspections, requests, quiet calls Thorn took behind closed doors. He needed a win. It came wrapped in a prisoner transfer. A high-value strategist, captured alive, dangerous not for what he carried but for what he knew, the insurgency's patterns, its patience, its mind. The order was simple: move him from obsidian to a hardened black site. No delays, no mistakes. The briefing room filled with Thorn's people, aggressive thinkers, men who believed speed solved everything. Ara sat at the far end, included but isolated. When her turn came, she erased the planned routes with a single motion. "These will get us killed," she said. Silence cracked across the room. She redrew the map slowly, a route that made no sense, longer, slower, through terrain convoys avoided for a reason. "They'll expect fast," she continued. "So we go slow. They'll expect night concealment, so we move where they won't look." Objections flew: too risky, too complex, too uncertain. Thorn listened without expression. Then he decided. "It's your plan," he said. "You laid it." It wasn't trust. It was a trap. The convoy rolled out under a moonless sky, engines muted, lights dark, hours stretched, tension tightened. Somewhere far away, an IED detonated on the highway they should have taken. The enemy struck shadows. Ara's convoy wasn't there. But the real test came later. A canyon, tight, unforgiving. RPG fire turned rock into shrapnel. Chaos returned in seconds. Ara moved. Orders sharp, precise. No wasted motion. She fought not with fury but inevitability, anticipating angles, reading intent, turning the ambush inward on itself. When it ended, the canyon was silent again. And one man stared at her like he'd seen a ghost. "Wraith," he whispered. The name hung there, heavy, dangerous. Ara said nothing, but the door inside her cracked. Back at Obsidian, the secret didn't stay buried. Legends never did. Soldiers whispered differently now, not about logistics, about history, about her. And Colonel Thorn felt it. The ground beneath his authority wasn't just cracked anymore. It was giving way. Because respect, once earned, doesn't ask permission. And humiliation doesn't forget. By the time the formation was called days later, 500 soldiers standing under the sun, Ara already knew. This wasn't training. It was reckoning. And Thorn had chosen the wrong way to remind the world who he thought he was. Sometimes power doesn't shout. Sometimes it waits. She stood in formation under the open sky, and for the first time, she felt the weight of being seen. 500 soldiers lined the parade ground, boots planted in the dust, eyes forward. The sun hung overhead like an accusation. Heat shimmered off the concrete. Sweat traced slow lines down spines and temples. It was supposed to be routine, hand-to-hand refresher drills, discipline, order. Ara Vance felt none of that. She felt watched. Not the casual glances she'd grown used to. This was different, heavier, curious, expectant. Whispers had changed tone since the canyon, since the name. Wraith. She hated how easily it returned to her, how a single word could reopen a life she'd buried layer by layer. She'd thought logistics would be quiet, safe, anonymous, a way to finish her service without reliving the ghosts. She had miscalculated. Colonel Marcus Thorn stepped onto the platform like a man reclaiming a stage, sleeves rolled, jaw tight, eyes sharp with something close to desperation. His voice carried easily. "Today is about readiness," he announced. "About reality, because the enemy doesn't fight fair and neither should we." Ara kept her gaze fixed ahead. She felt him see her anyway. "Captain Vance." The words struck like a dropped weapon. Front and center. A ripple moved through the ranks. She stepped forward calmly, heart steady, posture relaxed. Not submissive, not challenging, neutral. That was what worried her most. She felt no fear. Thorne circled her slowly. "Your file says you're certified in Level 3 combatives," he said. "Interesting for a logistics officer." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. Not humor, ownership. "Let's give the troops a demonstration." This wasn't instruction. It was punishment. Ara understood then. This was about control, about restoring the hierarchy he felt slipping through his fingers, about breaking the myth before it became bigger than him. "Assume a defensive stance," he ordered. She didn't move. A murmur rippled outward. Her hands hung loosely at her sides. Her shoulders were relaxed, her breathing even. Thorne's smile vanished. "Is that how you defend yourself?" he snapped. "Fine, real attackers don't wait." He moved. Fast, faster than most expected. A full-force roundhouse kick, driven by weight and rage, aimed to crush ribs and send a message no one would forget. Ara stepped inside the arc. It wasn't speed that saved her, it was timing. Her left hand locked his ankle. Her right struck behind the knee, precise, economical, final. A twist, a shift of weight. The sound echoed across the parade ground. Wet, sharp, irrevocable. Thorne screamed as his leg collapsed beneath him, bone failing where arrogance had led. He hit the ground hard, howling, clutching what no longer obeyed him. Silence followed. 500 soldiers stared. Ara stood over him, breathing steady, eyes clear. No triumph, no apology, just completion. Medics rushed in. Commands were shouted, none of it registered. The moment had already passed. By nightfall, the base felt hollow. Conversations were hushed. Laughter gone. The official story spread quickly: unprovoked attack, defensive response, witnesses unanimous. Thorne was airlifted out before dawn. His command ended on a stretcher. Ara returned to the depot. That was where the new commander found her days later. Brigadier General Hatcher didn't waste words. He didn't waste gestures. He simply saluted her, slowly, deliberately. Not rank to rank. Warrior to warrior. She returned it. Nothing more was needed. That evening she stood on the perimeter wall as the sun bled into the horizon. The desert quieted. For the first time in years, the silence didn't press in on her chest. The challenge coin rested beside her in the dust. She didn't hide it anymore. Some stories don't need to be told. They just need to be lived. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the quiet feel heavier after everything was over? Firebase Obsidian didn't celebrate. There were no speeches, no formation to mark the change in command, no banner lowered or raised. The base simply kept moving, the way wounded animals do, carefully, alert, pretending nothing had happened while feeling everything. Our Vance noticed the silence first. Not the absence of sound. The generators still hummed, boots still crunched on gravel, radios still chirped, but the edge was gone, the sharpness, the constant expectation of being judged by the wrong measure. She stood in the logistics depot watching a convoy load out, hands folded behind her back, posture easy. Soldiers moved with purpose around her now, asking questions without hesitation, listening when she answered. No one second-guessed her presence anymore. That should have felt like victory. Instead, it unsettled her. Respect came with weight, with memory, with expectation. She had spent years learning how to disappear. Now the base had learned how to see her, and she wasn't sure she liked what that unlocked inside her. The investigation concluded quickly. Clean, clinical, paperwork wrapped around the incident like gauze around a wound. Self-defense, authorized technique. Excessive force initiated by the instructor. Witnesses consistent. Case closed. Thorn became a story people told quietly. Not as a warning about arrogance, not officially, but everyone understood the lesson anyway. Power without restraint breaks itself. Ara didn't read the report. She didn't need to, she lived it. What haunted her wasn't the sound of the bone snapping. It was the moment before it, the certainty in her body, the calm acceptance that this was going to happen and there was no other outcome. She recognized that feeling. It was the same one she'd felt years ago, in places that no longer existed on maps. She tried to bury it again. Brigadier General Hatcher didn't summon her to his office. He walked, found her where she worked, where she belonged. He asked questions that mattered, about supply flows, about people, about what she'd noticed that didn't show up in reports. He listened. That was new. "You don't need to stay here," he told her one afternoon, voice low, private. "Your record could reopen doors you chose to close." Ara met his gaze. "I'm where I'm useful, sir." He studied her for a long moment, then nodded, not agreement, understanding. Usefulness, she knew, was safer than recognition. Weeks passed, the base grew steadier, training changed, slower, smarter, fewer mistakes. The guards rotated differently now. Blind spots closed, systems tightened. Ara said little. She didn't need to. One night, Private Jenkins found her again on the perimeter wall. He'd grown taller somehow, straighter. Confidence had crept into his posture without asking permission. "They're transferring me to Intel Command," he said. Pride flickered, uncertain. "I spoke up during an analysis brief. Didn't freeze this time." Ara nodded. "Good." He hesitated. "You ever regretted standing out?" She looked out across the desert. The stars were sharp tonight, unforgiving. "Yes," she said, "sometimes." He waited. "But disappearing costs more," she added. That was the truth she'd avoided for years. After Jenkins left, she stayed longer than usual. The desert cooled. Wind whispered across sand and wire. The challenge coin lay beside her, catching starlight. She picked it up. For the first time in a long while, she let herself remember. The unit that didn't exist. The name she'd worn like armor. The missions that blurred together until faces replaced objectives. The moment she'd been declared dead so others could live quieter lives. She agreed to vanish then, chosen logistics, chosen order, chosen safety over purpose. But safety, she realized now, was never the same as peace. The base slept behind her, alive, intact, better than it had been. Because she'd stepped forward. Because she'd stopped pretending she was less than she was. Ara closed her fingers around the coin and slipped it back into her pocket, not hidden, just held. Morning would come, another convoy, another problem to solve, another quiet choice between staying small and standing firm. She knew which one she'd make. Not because she wanted to be seen, but because some systems only survive when someone is willing to see clearly and act without asking for permission. The desert didn't care who she was, but the people did. And for the first time, that didn't feel like a threat. It felt like responsibility. And responsibility, she had learned, was the truest form of strength. Why did the order come through in the middle of the night? Quiet, specific, and carrying a weight she hadn't felt in years. Our Vance was awake before the knock came. She always was. The base slept in layers, some shallow, some deep, but she lived in the space between. When the knock sounded on her door, controlled and deliberate, it didn't startle her. It confirmed something she'd already sensed all evening. A subtle tightening in the air, a disturbance in the baseline she'd memorized. She opened the door to find Brigadier General Hatcher himself standing there, not an aide, not a runner. Just him, uniform crisp, eyes tired but alert. "Captain," he said quietly, "we need to talk." They walked, not to his office, but to the small, dimly lit planning room adjacent to the command center. No guards posted outside. No digital displays active. Only a single table and 2 chairs. That told her everything. "There's a problem," Hatcher said once the door was closed, "and I'm not putting it in writing." Ara didn't speak. She waited. "A task force went dark 6 hours ago," he continued. "Recon element, 3 teams, good people. Last known position is outside our normal operational footprint." He slid a tablet across the table. Ara glanced down. Coordinates, terrain, patterns. Her jaw tightened just slightly. "They weren't supposed to be there," she said. "No," Hatcher agreed, "which means someone else knew they would be." Silence settled between them. "I've been told you're the best person to understand how that happens," he said. "Not officially, not on paper." Ara leaned back slowly. "I'm logistics," she replied. Hatcher met her gaze without flinching. "You're whatever the situation requires." There it was. The door she tried to keep closed wasn't just unlocked anymore. It was being held open. She thought of the canyon, the parade ground, the sound of breaking bone, the way it hadn't frightened her, how it had felt like coming home. "I won't command," she said. "I won't lead troops into something they didn't sign up for." "You'll advise," he said, "and if you choose to step away, that's your call." He stood. "We move at dawn." She didn't answer right away. After he left, Ara sat alone in the dim room, staring at the coordinates until they burned themselves into her mind. The terrain told a story. So did the gaps, the silence where signals should have been. Someone had laid a trap. Clean, patient, confident. That kind of enemy didn't improvise. She found herself on the perimeter wall again before dawn, coffee cooling in her hands. The desert stretched endlessly, indifferent. The challenge coin felt heavier in her pocket than it ever had. She took it out and turned it over in her fingers. Once that coin had meant belonging, a promise that someone would always be watching her back. Then it had meant survival, a reminder of who she'd been when everything else was stripped away. Now it meant choice. The convoy rolled out just after first light. Ara rode in the lead vehicle, not as commander, not as legend, but as a quiet presence with a headset and a map. The soldiers didn't know her history. They didn't need to. They trusted her voice. The trail led into broken land, jagged ridges, dry channels, places where sound died and sight lied. She listened more than she spoke, adjusting routes by meters, not miles. Small corrections that meant everything. Halfway to the last known position, she felt it. A wrongness. "Stop," she said. The convoy halted. She closed her eyes for a second, listened. Wind, metal cooling, no birds, no insects. "They want us to push forward," she said calmly, "so we won't." They dismounted, spread, waited. Minutes passed. Then the ground ahead erupted. The ambush sprang on empty space. From a ridgeline, Ara watched figures scramble in confusion as their trap collapsed into nothing. The enemy hadn't planned for restraint. They'd planned for aggression. They hadn't planned for her. By nightfall, they found the task force survivors, battered, dehydrated, shaken but alive, hidden exactly where Ara had predicted they would be. One of the team leaders stared at her in disbelief. "How did you know?" he asked. She shook her head. "I didn't, I listened." The return to Obsidian was quiet. Hatcher didn't praise her. He didn't need to. He simply nodded once deeply. That night, Ara didn't stand on the wall. She slept, dreamless, for the first time in years, because she finally understood something she'd been running from since the day she'd disappeared. Her past wasn't a chain. It was a tool, and tools didn't define the hand that used them, only the purpose behind the grip. The war hadn't asked her to come back, but it had made space for her, and this time she chose to stand in it. The desert was quiet, almost reverently, as if it had been holding its breath for years waiting for her to return. Our Vance stood on the perimeter wall at dusk, the sun bleeding from orange to purple over the horizon. The wind was softer now, carrying only the subtle grit of sand, whispers of the day's heat fading into night. For a moment, the base below seemed to pause, as if sensing the calm that came after storms both literal and human. She held her mug of coffee, hot and fragrant in the cool evening air. Private Jenkins had handed it to her silently, no words needed between them. He had changed too, straighter, steadier, as if standing near her had taught him how to carry certainty even in uncertainty. Ara didn't speak, only nodded. Small gestures were enough. Everything had shifted. Respect was no longer something she had to earn. It was simply recognized, reflected back in the eyes of those who had seen her act without hesitation when it mattered most. The challenge coin rested beside her on the dusty ledge, catching the last crimson rays of the sun. She didn't pick it up right away. Instead, she let her gaze drift across the desert, taking in the empty horizon, the barracks, the mess hall, the firing ranges, all of it alive with the hum of soldiers who would never fully understand what had saved them. They saw her now, yes, but even more than that, they felt the certainty she carried without needing to voice it. Invisible calculations, precise movements, the calm in chaos. She had lived it and they had witnessed it. That was enough. The thought returned to her again. Wraith. The name that had once been buried, whispered only in classified files and suppressed legends. Once it had been her entire identity, the operative who vanished so others could live in ignorance of her presence. Now the name existed quietly in their minds like a ghost passing through walls, respected, feared, admired. But she was Wraith anymore, not in the way she had been. She was Ara Vance, logistics captain, guardian of systems, watcher of the desert. A soldier who understood that power wasn't about pride or accolades. It was about action, about understanding the unseen and responding when the world expected hesitation. A soft breeze tugged at her blue shirt, the fabric clean, unassuming, yet she carried the weight of every decision, every observation, every silent calculation she had made. Her hands had built systems, observed weaknesses, predicted movements. They had saved lives, and when challenged by brute force and arrogance, they had struck with inevitability, not malice. The sound of bone breaking in the parade ground was now just a memory, a stark reminder that justice, when precise and necessary, could be silent and absolute. She allowed herself to remember the moments before that act, the tension in the air, the heat of the sun, the collective breath of 500 soldiers suspended in disbelief. She hadn't enjoyed it, hadn't sought it, but she had acted because acting was her duty. And sometimes that duty demanded that dignity not speak. It demanded action. Ara let the coffee cool as the desert sky darkened. Stars began to pierce the indigo night. Somewhere far away, the quiet hum of a generator reminded her that life went on, that the machine she served was steady, functional, alive. The soldiers below moved with purpose now, confidence restored, training smarter, thinking differently. They carried the memory of her actions like an invisible hand guiding them, though they didn't fully know it. That was how leadership worked sometimes, unseen, unheralded, enduring. And in that enduring silence, Ara finally let herself breathe fully. Her past, once secret, was known. Her present secure. Her value undeniable. She could rest for a moment in the simple truth that she had stood in the right place at the right time and done what needed doing. Not for recognition, not for fame, not even for pride. Just for the responsibility she had chosen to accept. The desert whispered its approval. The bass hummed with quiet diligence. And Ara Vance, standing tall, drinking her coffee, watching the stars emerge one by one, understood that some victories were measured not in medals or commands, but in the steady pulse of lives preserved, in the silence that followed a storm, in the quiet dignity of a choice made and executed flawlessly. Sometimes, she thought, as the wind brushed her face and the last light faded, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. She smiled faintly, not at herself, not at others, but at the desert at the base, at the quiet triumph that came from being exactly who she was meant to be. And for the first time in a long while, Ara Vance felt the weight of peace settle across her shoulders like a familiar coat. The war continued, the desert remained unforgiving, and the night grew thick and cold. But within her, a quiet certainty endured. She had acted, she had endured, and she had survived, not by hiding, not by yielding, but by listening, by seeing, and by stepping forward when the world demanded courage and clarity in the same breath. Her story was no longer whispered. It was lived, and the echo of her choices would shape the base, the soldiers, and even the men who had once sought to break her, long after she had walked away from the parade ground, into the desert, into the quiet dusk of a world that finally understood her worth.